year to year. And that's no one desire. That if there is a Messiah, someday he there will start prayer. Cover the restaurants, scanty, 10 people in a one-bedroom shanty. Forced to sell on the pavement, no vacancy, no employment. Cattle fire cracker from gunshot. Blood that's flow when things get hot. Afraid to look out the window. Their voices from the ghetto. Crying, crying, Lord, Lord, crying, crying. Voices from the ghetto. Crying, crying, Lord, Lord, crying. Voices from the ghetto. Help us, Father. Mothers just hold their head on ball. And them woman stronger than a wall. A big pusher eyeing she daughter. Son in jail for manslaughter. Too bad for him, he a name bad boys. No bail, that's the black man's choice. Like Shadow say, poverty is hell. She little girl child belly start to swell. Some say life is a cycle, but don't trust your circle. Yeah, will it all end on it time to tell. Outside the siren keep howling, inside your belly room growling. Police raid very often, Simpson measuring a coffin. One night in bed you're sleeping, next night is a wave that you're keeping. So you're praying to win the battle. Not to hear voices from the ghetto. Crying, 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 crying. Voices from the ghetto. Crying, Lord, crying, crying. Voices from the ghetto. We are not a forgotten people. Yo. With dented Friday soldier on. Revolutions based politicians born. And often their tragic story brings a journalist glory. No wonder they view the world with scorn. From since the day they're born, some call them rebels without a cause. These social victims of unjust laws, but yet they christen the heroes. Renegades, desperados, forever knocking on heaven's door. Hear me? Still band music shatters the silence. Harmony to conquer the violence. Big men run when cops approach, fighting for scraps with the cockroach. Young Turks, they're tough protecting. Almost every young girl expecting. So tomorrow, heads still a borrow. There'll be another voice from the ghetto. Crying, Lord, crying, crying. Voices from the ghetto. Crying, mama. Papa. Voices from the ghetto. Social amenities, Lord, heaven knows. Opportunities, well, them always close. color. So if you can't stretch your dollar, it's later for you crackers. You're short of dead from pride. Life does rape dignity. Right.
You're not too straight.
Till there's only bitterness left inside. And every day is a hustle. Arguments are settled with muscle. Till you're 6 feet deep by 3 feet wide. Children through life keep on drifting. It's something they're smoking or sniffing. Maybe they're trying to forget the life of misery and regret. No one to come to their rescue except Capleton and Buju. So they boom boxes the Lego. Drum out voices from the ghetto.
Good evening, St. Vincent and the Grenadines. My name is Jomo Thomas. The program you're about to listen to is called Voices. This is the Voices program for August 10th, 2026. We don't have guests in tonight, but there are a number of very important issues I want to talk us through, and I hope you would help me to raise your voice on some of them. Firstly, before I explain what I want to do as I normally do, and to read my column for last week. That column is called "The Case for Nellie Ibu." Nellie Ibu is an enslaved African woman who, in the early part of the 19th century, some historians say 2005, others say 2009, that Nellie Ibu and a group of other enslaved people on the estate in Mairo decided to strike a blow for freedom, for self-defense against the criminal institution of slavery. The legend is that she took a hoe, knocked the overseer, the white overseer, off his horse. They killed him and then discarded his body. Nellie Ibu was captured along with some of our other compatriots. They were all killed. They were all hanged. So I want to read my column. As I said, it's called "The Case for Nellie Ibu." I introduce it with a quote from the outstanding feminist poet. Her mother was from Barbados. Her father was from Grenada. And her quote says, "The master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. The master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. They may allow us to temporarily beat him at his own game, but they will never enable us to bring about genuine change." Very important quote. So, I was introduced to Nellie Ibu by Father Mark, the popular Catholic priest who has done more quiet but especially important work spreading the gospel across St. Vincent and the Grenadines. About 12 years ago, I was reading one of his books about life on the Grenadine island of Mairo and discovered Nellie Ibu, an enslaved Black woman who, along with others, rose in righteous indignation and slew the estate overseer. I was committed to telling her story ever since. So when Dr. Gary Michael Denny, one of 3 local historians commissioned to write the definitive history of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, he, along with Dr. Fraser and Dr. Steve Scott, when Dr. Denny took the stage on Emancipation Day, urging the government to declare Nellie Ibu our first female national hero, I was ecstatic. To understand the singular importance of the decision to rebel, resist, and self-sacrifice, one has to understand the times in which Nellie Ibu lived. The legend is that her supreme act was committed in the first decade of the 19th century, around 1805. This is a few years after the death of Chief Chatelier in 1795, the banishment of thousands of conquered Garifuna, the conquest of our homeland by British colonialists, and the transformation of St. Vincent and the Grenadines into a slave society. Protests, uprising, and rebellion roiled the Caribbean. The Haitian Revolution had triumphed, and the first free Black Republic was declared in 1804. News of this proclamation must have shaken the very foundation of slavery in the Caribbean and inspired the enslaved to strike a blow for their own liberation. As we will see, the defiantly courageous act of the Nelly Ibu Sisterhood was a precursor to the 1816 Busa Rebellion in Barbados and the 1831 slave uprising in Jamaica, led by Sam Sharpe. The enslaved across the region were freed less than 30 years later in 1834. The historical record is replete with stories of the backbreaking work that enslaved Africans performed to fill the coffers of estate owners. The kill rate was so high that enslaved Africans were expected to live no more than 7 years. It was a terrible and deadly time to be a child. The record also paints a horrific story of the gender abuse so prevalent during slavery. The enslavers, masters, and overseers simply had their way with our women and girls. Many were raped, tortured, beaten, and killed for resisting the sexual advances of rapists and pedophiles. After all, the cruel slave system viewed our ancestors as chattel, property, in much the same way as they viewed an animal. It is with this understanding that historian Michael Denny told the Nelly the Ibu story and called for her to be declared a national hero by Emancipation Day 2027, adding that this is not possible in colonial times, but it is our government now. We have the capacity to decide who are our heroes. Dr. Denny made his case by noting that 5 Black women gave their lives, paid the heaviest price for the freedom that we enjoy today. And then he went on to make an even more profound point. Freedom, our freedom, was not simply a gift. Freedom, our freedom, is something we paid for in money and blood. Correcting the historical record, Dr. Denny crowned Nelly the Ibu and her rebellious womenfolk as freedom fighters and rejected the co-conspirator label that had been attached to them since the execution. We have to understand which stories must be told, which stories have a reverence to which our children must be acquainted. The story of Nelly the Ibu, a Black woman standing against slavery and with other Black women giving their lives so that we today can enjoy freedom. Let's remember them in the most positive way we can. Make Nelly the Ibu a national hero. In making such a decision about who should be celebrated and honored, it must be understood that is freedom we're making. The narrative has to be reinvented. The his story has to be unlearned and relearned and proclaimed as our story. The language and discourse must be turned inside out. The colonial narrative of who we were must be abandoned. Where they saw savages who engaged in senseless revolt and murdered their civilized enslavers, we must discover masters of many crafts. The retelling of reality on our island must be repackaged, not as a glorified revisionism, but as a journey to recapture our sovereignty. Our ancestors' anger must be reinterpreted as righteous indignation. Their troublemaking must be reimagined as good trouble, rebellion, and self-defense. Only by recrafting our story will we truly grasp what Archibald Laud meant by the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. Busa Zimbabwe. Busa, Kofi, Sam Sharp, and Fidan rebelled against the oppressive, exploitative, and dehumanizing slave conditions in Barbados, Guyana, Jamaica, and Grenada. Nelly Ibu made the ultimate sacrifice of freedom. So many of us, I'll read it again. Nelly Ibu made the ultimate sacrifice of freedom. So many of us take for granted today. Because females suffered so much in our march for national advancement, a fitting tribute to their contribution would be to bestow the highest national honor on Nelly Ibu. Our woman folk deserve nothing less. So that was my take for last week, and it did generate some talk. Some people did not like the idea that we would want to celebrate a woman. Some of them said, why would we celebrate a murderer? And my simple response was that Nelly Ibu was not a murderer. Nelly Ibu was acting in self-defense. And the truth of the matter is that slavery, as the United Nations recognized on March 25th, 2026, was the gravest crime humanity has ever experienced. The gravest crime. So when an enslaved African person took up arms, fought, as Busa did, as Fidan did, as Chatelier did, as Kofi did, as many of our brothers and sisters across the former colonial world and on the African continent did, that was not committing crime. In fact, the United Nations itself recognized that colonized people have a right to self-defense, and that you can't commit a crime defending against your national sovereignty. That's the state of the law. That is not Jomo Sanga Thomas talking. But you know, that story about Nelly Ibu and Emancipation Day has had a lot of coverage. So I don't want to spend a lot of time on that. What I want to do is to spend some time, and I hope you would share this time with me, talking about what I perceive to be the crisis in Caribbean jurisprudence, the crisis in Caribbean court system. Some of you would remember that a few weeks ago, the High Court of Grenada, Justice Glasgow, ruled that the appointment of former Justice Eddie Ventos was unconstitutional, null, void, and of no effect. Those of you who follow the court would know that Justice Ventos has been on the court for some time now, the Court of Appeal. There was even talk that he was one of the persons who had applied to become Chief Justice of the Eastern Caribbean Supreme Court. And then we know that the group led by, now let me not say that, let me just say what's in the public domain. King's Counsel out of Grenada, Mr. Bristol, filed a claim in the Grenadian High Court, arguing that Justice Eddie Ventos had not been properly qualified. He argued that he had not served the requisite 15 years, done 15 years of advocacy as a lawyer in order to qualify as a judge to sit on the Court of Appeal. The matter was argued for some time, and then Justice Glasgow rendered a decision in which he took the view that all things being said, Justice Ventus did not have the requisite 15 years advocacy, and consequently his appointment by the Regional Judicial Service Commission was ruled to be unconstitutional, null, and void. That's an important thing to happen because it means that a judge who was sitting on our courts, in fact, many of you may remember that Justice Ventos was the lead judge in the vaccine mandate case out of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And he overturned the decision by Justice Esco Henry, who is now a sitting member of the Eastern Caribbean Court of Appeal. He overturned that decision in which Justice Henry found that the vaccine mandate was unconstitutional, null, unlawful, illegal, and null and void. So we had that problem to contend with. And Justice Glasgow, in his decision, talked about in the ex officio officers law, well, more tradition, in which it is established that if a judge is in, it is a long common law tradition that says if a judge is well, let me take that back. If an individual is brought onto a tribunal, a judicial tribunal, and that person is later found to be not qualified, then it is not necessarily the case that all of the decisions which that person might have rendered would become null and void. But just last week, there was a piece in the papers by King's Counsel Bristol out of Grenada, in which King's Counsel Bristol admitted that, look, I was not challenging Justice Ventus's qualifications, his stellar academic credentials, and all of the intellectual good work that he had done. I was simply challenging him on the statutory rule that he had not qualified as a judge to sit. But he also went on to say significantly that while there's this ex officio rule, it is his view that because Justice Ventus's sitting on the court was ruled unconstitutional, that in his estimation, all of the decisions on which Justice Ventus sat, particularly where he was the leading judge writing the decision, that those decisions are suspect at best and can be challenged. In other words, he was saying that while they may not be void, they are clearly voidable. And he argued that to the extent that any litigant who had a difficulty with any of those decisions, that they should make approaches to the Court of Appeal to see what the Court of Appeal would say regarding any decision in which Justice Eddie Ventus might have participated in. Now, that was a problem, right? Because you wonder that the Regional Judicial Service Commission, these are good people, they are supposed to do a certain level of scrutiny. They are supposed to pay close attention to the rules, to the laws, to the CV that the different persons who are applying for various positions would have, and then make a decision that is proper and reasonable. But in this case, as we saw with the ruling of Justice Glasgow, the Regional Judicial Service Commission might have erred in not doing the basic arithmetic that would allow for the 15-year rule in order for someone to sit on our court of appeal. So that caused a kind of a crisis, right? And if we thought that was, all, we now have the situation with the CCJ. In fact, I'm not sure who all have been paying attention to this piece, but I'll read a little from the Kaisha News. Kaisha is a news outfit in Guyana, and the Kaisha News has a piece that says, Caribbean Court of Justice under pressure as judges leaked emails raise questions over independence. And the reason why this is important is because a number of people who don't have confidence in the Caribbean court have spoken to the issue of lack of independence. They talk about the fact that governments can improperly influence decisions. So, but I'll come back to that point. Before I get into that, I want to read a little from the Kaisha News. It says, an explosive internal rift at the Caribbean Court of Justice has triggered fresh concerns about the independence and credibility of the region's highest court, following leaked emails in which sitting judges accuse President Justice Winston Anderson of dictatorial leadership, panel manipulation, and attempts to influence judicial opinions. The revelations sparked alarm in Guyana, particularly over allegations that the court's internal tension spilled into the politically sensitive Mohammed versus Moha extradition matter involving opposition leader and member of parliament Azharuddin Mohammed. However, in a statement responding to the Trinidad Express, the CCJ has reaffirmed its commitment to judicial independence, integrity, and public confidence in the administration of justice, saying the questions and allegations could be misunderstood or mischaracterized without proper context. The court did not say what was the proper context in which people should view the leaked emails. In a statement to the Sunday Express on Friday night, the regional tribunal stressed that its judges remain guided by the principles of the United Nations Bangalore Principles of Judicial Conduct and committed to delivering fair, accessible, and efficient justice across the Caribbean community. And so that was, let me just give a little history, a little context. It says, the leaked internal correspondence first reported by the Trinidad Express revealed that 5 of the court's 6 sitting justices, Justice Chili Ibu Usuji, Chantel Onanawu, Arif Bulkan, Maureen Rajnath Lee, and Peter Jamada have directly challenged Justice Anderson's administration. In the email, Justice Ramada describes a toxic environment, detailing what he characterized as an unprecedented attempt to influence the opinions of colleagues during deliberations on the extradition matter involving opposition leader Azharuddin Mohammed. Endorsing Jamada's warning of creeping patterns of anti-democratic approaches, Justice Ibu Usuji went further, alleging that he had never seen before the level of dictatorship in the administration of the judiciary, and claiming Justice Anderson's pointedly sought to announce a decision in the Mohammed case, despite clear opposition from a majority of his colleagues. Now, those are important allegations that strike, that go to the very heart of our court in the region and what we expect. Because as I said earlier, when this court was established in 2001, I think it was. Yeah, I think it was 2001, because our own Adrian Sanders went on to the court in 2005. But when the court was established over 25 years ago, there was a lot of talk about this might be the Caribbean government's equivalent of a hanging court. Because we would remember that in 1998, the Privy Council had issued a decision in Pratt v. Morgan. And the Pratt v. Morgan decision by the Privy Council essentially made it very difficult for Caribbean governments to engage in executions of convicted, condemned persons, because the bottom line in the Pratt v. Morgan decision was that in order for someone to be executed, that judge, that presiding judge, must conclude that the crime which resulted in the death of an individual or individuals must be considered in the eyes of the community the worst of the worst. So when Pratt v. Morgan came out, a lot of people thought that the governments, by establishing the Caribbean Court of Justice, was making a way to try to continue with hanging. A lot of people felt that. But by 2007, the Caribbean Court of Justice, in a decision titled Joseph versus the Attorney General of Barbados, made it clear that in many respects they would follow the jurisprudence as established by the Privy Council. So that notion of the Caribbean, the CCJ being a hanging court, fell off after the decision in Joseph versus the Attorney General of Barbados. And to its credit, many people who talked about the CCJ being a court that can be influenced by governments went on to issue in its appellate jurisdiction a number of decisions that struck at the heart of the state. Many decisions brought against different countries that had taken on the CCJ as its highest court. We're talking about Belize, the Buggery case. We're talking about Guyana and the cross-dressing case. We're talking about Trinidad on the issue of with the cement case. We're talking about the Moyo case, where the CCJ ruled that politicians who wasted government monies and engaged in corrupt practices could be brought to heel. So there are a number of very significant cases, and many persons, many lawyers, many judges, many citizens who were very happy that we were finally reclaiming our sovereignty, that we were finally moving towards breaking with colonial governments and authorities, praised the Caribbean Court of Justice and said, yes, in fact, the Caribbean Court of Justice had begun developing a certain level of jurisprudence of its own, breaking away from the British Privy Council, breaking away from British jurisprudence in areas of the role of the role of the state, the role of the important place of the fundamental rights and freedoms which are enshrined in the constitutions after independence. So there was always that tension between what the colonial overlords had established as their law and what these judges were doing after independence. So the CCJ had broken away from the Privy Council in fundamental ways. And I'll give an example. There was a case that went from Trinidad that went up to the Privy Council on the issue of the death penalty. And the Privy Council ruled that on the, was it? Yes, on the issue of the death penalty, because the death penalty was enshrined in the Constitution before independence, even after Trinidad became independent, you have what is called the saving clause. That is to say, all of the rules and laws which existed under colonial times would now continue in the independent period. So the Privy Council ruled that if Trinidad wanted to go away with the death penalty, then they had to go to the Parliament to have the Parliament change the law. The Privy Council, on the other hand, says, well, we're not going to hold this saving clause to be sacrosanct. The Privy Council ruled, not the Privy Council, the Caribbean Court of Justice ruled that wherever the colonial laws ran afoul of the fundamental rights and freedoms which were installed in the Independence Constitution, they would push the old saving clause aside and defend and respect the fundamental rights and freedoms of citizens. So that's where, in one instance in which the court was establishing its independence, and I thought that was a good thing. So there was this tension, and that is why the developments over the last few weeks, the last month or so, particularly development here with the CCJ, was so unfortunate, so disheartening for people like me, many other brothers and sisters I know across the region who are strong supporters in the emergence and development of the Caribbean Court of Justice as a court that is on par with any other court in the world. The fact of the matter is that when judges on a court, and in the case of the Privy Council, 5 of the 6 judges, right? 5 of the 6 judges literally rebelling against this judge, against the president of the court. 5 of them saying, you know, we have Jamada, Chantal, Ununawu. I haven't seen anything from Denny Burrows. People remember Denny Burrows used to be on our Eastern Caribbean Court of Appeal. He's now on the CCJ, but I didn't see any comment from him. Justice Chili Ibu Suji, Madam Justice Marine Rajnath Lee, and Justice Arif Bulkan. All of them coming out, making comments, very strong, very forceful comment, particularly Justice Jamada, a justice that I have tremendous respect for, and Justice Chili Ibu Asuji, making very strong comments, accusing the Justice Anderson of dictatorial policies, panel fixing, and attempts to influence the court. I mean, those are serious charges. I mean, dictatorial leadership aside, but panel fixing and attempt to influence the court. That's the thing that people have always been concerned about. That's the thing that people said they couldn't trust a Caribbean court for. That's the precise thing that people, particularly politicians, who they out of power, they oppose the court, and when they're in power, they want to support the court. So the whole issue of what would be our final court, which court would be our final court, the Privy Council or the Caribbean Court of Justice, became almost like a political football. And what we wanted, and what I think in the main happened over the first 25 years, was for the court to set up a record that would allow it to convince Caribbean people that it is a very strong court. And in fact, you saw a lot of comments and positive comments from other courts from across the world about the soundness of the Caribbean Court of Justice. And now this. Really, really unfortunate situation. I'm really hoping that we can get past it. I don't know how we're going to get past it, but in my estimation, it's a very serious and important crisis. It is one that has to be dealt with. It's one that I hope will be dealt with swiftly. I know that many people across our region are saddened and disappointed. I spoke to a number of colleagues and attorneys across the region since yesterday, and they have all expressed dismay. They are saddened. They are really, really concerned with this new turn in events. Something else sad. You know, today when I was coming home thinking about what we can do, I was listening to a podcast, and I was listening to Ta-Nehisi Coates, and we will come back to him later. But Ta-Nehisi Coates, there was a quote that he said, and I want you to pay attention to this because I think it's fundamentally important. He said, there is no quality in intellectual life that's more overrated than intellect itself. I want to read that again. Ta-Nehisi Coates says, there is no quality in intellectual life that is more overrated than intellect itself. I posted it on my page because I think it's exceedingly profound. That a lot of times we are carried away by what appears to be academic brilliance, our ability to maneuver, to speak, to answer flawlessly, to say the things that people may impress other people. And Coates is saying it is a quality that it is highly overrated because we get taken up by our own brilliance and we no longer stop and pause. You know, one of the charges I saw in the discourse between the judges and the CCJ was that apparently very, very early when Justice Anderson emerged as the president, he channeled, look, I'm not into this democratic consensus thing. And there was another accusation by Justice Chili Asuji, who said that there were attempts on the part of President Anderson to try to do away with dissenting opinions. And I remember having a discussion some years ago with one of the justices on the CCJ that said one of the things that they tried to do on the CCJ, and I believe they used to try to do it, or probably still try to do it on the Eastern Caribbean Court of Appeal, is to have decisions by consensus, but particularly on major issues of law, jurisprudence, they try to come back with unanimous decisions. So you don't have a dissent. But Justice Chili Asuji was making the point that before Justice Anderson became the president of the court, he was notorious for writing dissenting opinions. And then after he emerged as the president of the court, he tried to dissuade others from writing dissenting opinions and reports. Now, that is very, very troubling in itself. I see my friend Cheryl Record, good to see you, asking, what's the remedy? The truth of the matter is that I don't know. I don't know. The question goes back to the Regional Judicial Service Commission, the selection process. But you can be sure, like any other court in the place in the world, there's a lot of jockeying. Different brilliant minds are coming up. People are going to jockey to say, okay, I like Joe Moore, I like Cheryl, I like Kenny Boucher to be on the court. I remember distinctly when there was when Colin John, our former commissioner of police, when the Bar Association found out that he was nominated to be a magistrate, the bar wrote to the Judicial Services Commission expressing concerns about the fact that all of our magistrates then, Magistrate Pompey, the proposal for Magistrate John, Magistrate Bala, all of them had been police officers. And there was the question about whether Colin John, who had just been the chief of police, how would it work for him to now emerge as the first, there was the issue of becoming a magistrate, and then he eventually emerged as the chief magistrate. And, you know, because he was commissioner for a number of years, there were a lot of matters that were coming before him, which he as police commissioner had presided over. And that presented a problem for the court. And I remember going before him and asking that he recluse himself from a particular matter, which he graciously did, and sent downstairs to another magistrate. And then there was another issue where we got in some conflict, and he said, you know what, I don't want to hear any matter in which Jomo Thomas appears. But the point I want to make is that the Judicial Legal Services Commission evidently did not pay a lot of attention to the query, the complaint that came from the local bar. Because in short order, the Colin John was not only, after he was confirmed as a magistrate, he went on and became the chief magistrate in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Yeah. So Cheryl wants to know, there's a question of impeachment. Well, remember, as the CCJ said in a statement, some of these emails could be out of context. I am presuming, Cheryl, that they may have an investigation. I'm hoping that they're having an investigation, that they will not take forever to do that investigation. And then all of these allegations which were leaked, they would check them out and they would come to see whether they meet muster. And if they are in fact true, for example, if it is established that a judge, a chief judge, is fixing panels, then that's a very, very serious matter for which I think a judge can be removed for misbehavior in public office. So there's that possibility. And I am hoping that the court, those people who run the admission of the court, the Judicial Legal Services Commission, will act with expedition to clear that up. That's the Kenny Boucher is making a very important point, and that is my biggest fear. In fact, I've heard since yesterday where different persons are saying, you know, that's why we don't want to have a final court in our region. Remember, the Jamaicans are playing football with the issue of whether you have a final court. The PNP supported the CCJ as the final court. The JLP opposed it. The JLP is now in power for the last 4 terms, and the JLP says, we don't believe in the CCJ. If anything, we should have our own final court. meaning that a court of appeal could be their Jamaican Court of Appeal could be their final court. I remember years ago, Kamala Prasad Bisesa, in her first term as Prime Minister of Trinidad, says, I don't mind. And she's a lawyer, and a lawyer of some note too. She's a senior counsel. She said then that she would agree that some matters, that criminal matters, go to the Caribbean Court of Justice, but not business and commercial matters, as if to say she didn't think that our judges had the intellect that was, that she didn't think that our judges had the intellect to do what British judges would do. And as we're talking about this, my good brother, Gary Cummins said, I told you years ago that the CCJ was flawed. Well, human beings are flawed. Gary, I can't recall what were the precise points you made to point to its flaws, but human beings are flaws. I still believe that the CCJ should be our final court. I still believe that. I still believe that in the third decade of the 21st century, we really, really should not have a final court be in a court in another country. I'm not sure how any self-respecting human being would come to the conclusion that it's best for us to have a final court. It's like saying the United States Supreme Court should be the final court, should be the final arbiter of all legal and judicial matters coming out of St. Vincent or coming out of the Caribbean. That should not sit well with anybody who feels comfortable living in an independent country. So I still believe that the court, the CCJ, should be our final court. I am quite sure that if we were to do a check across the world, the allegations that are coming out now against Justice Anderson may not be unique. It is highly probable that other courts, including courts from very highly established jurisdictions, may have had similar problems in the past or currently. So I don't want us to run away thinking that there's this peculiar flaw that affects and impacts our court and our dispensation of justice. And as I said, and I want to reiterate, that many of the decisions which the Caribbean Court of Justice rendered over the years were decisions which were rendered against the different governments that have acceded to the CCJ's jurisdiction as its highest court. So I'm not sure that the charge that politicians are going to control the court has been borne out over the last 25 years. And then I just now want to address a point with which Professor Justin Robinson is making. He says, is a crisis being engineered to undermine the CCJ? I don't know. Why would the emails leaked? Who leaked them? Who had an interest in leaking them? Did the judges who expressed very strong views, Justice Jamada, Justice Usuji, did they want their views to be spread across the newspapers and the media? People, in fact, in the email you heard one of them, I can't remember which of them, it might have been Justice Jamada, calling for an urgent meeting of the colleagues to sit down and try to work things through. I'm not so sure they wanted, because evidently they would know that such a leak would create problems. So I don't know if it's being engineered to undermine the court. I mean, the realm of possibilities are infinite. I'm not sure that any of the judges on the court would want to undermine it. But there are other people in the judiciary who may want to do things that may undermine the court. I'll give an example of what I'm talking about. In the Ventos decision, there was an understanding that at best, Justice Ventos, whose election to the court was found unconstitutional because at best he was only an advocate for 14 years and 8 months. Well, you can be sure the 15-year number is an arbitrary number. If at best they argued that Justice Ventos was 14 years and 8 months, giving him all the things that he wanted to take, then the question is, why go after him? Was there something larger that those who went after him wanted to get at? You see what I'm saying? And this is in support of the point that Professor Robinson is making, that some people might have wanted to undermine. Because remember, in that case with Justice Ventos, it was said, oh, we don't question his erudition, we don't question his scholarship, we don't question his abilities, we don't question any of that. The only thing we are holding on to is the fact that he should have been there for 50, practiced as an advocate for 15 years, and he did not meet that threshold. So consequently, we should have him removed. And this is coming from somebody who was on the other side, was on the side that lost in a matter with Justice Ventos, where Justice Ventos sat, and that was the vaccine mandate case. We carried the case of the workers, and we were very, very disappointed with that ruling. And this is why we are so confident that the Privy Council would overturn it. But still, I always believe that I've explained to my colleagues that I thought that it was a hatchet job that was done on Justice Ventos, even though I disagreed fundamentally with the way he dealt with issues of abandonment of a job, the way he dealt with the right to be heard, which were, principles of ancient vintage, and he simply just threw them aside to come up with a decision. Some of us, some of us. Speaking for myself, I can say that I don't know to what extent there was a matter of careerism behind what he did, in the sense that he had applied to become the Chief Justice. He knew that if any single leader had opposed his election, his elevation to the Chief Justice position, could not get it. The best example of that is the Dominican jurist. His name eludes me now, but he had done very good work in Grenada. And when he came, he acted as Chief Justice for many years, but couldn't become Chief Justice because it is said that Keith Mitchell had been opposed to him emerging as the Chief Justice. And Grenadian colleagues would tell you that they felt that Patrick, oh no, what's his name? His name just go across my brain. Brian Aline. Many of our colleagues in Grenada says that Brian Aline stood between Gary and a very dark place in Grenada. So when he emerged in the court, not Gary, Mitchell. So when he emerged, Mitchell, it is said to have blocked it. So the same things apply here, Doc. I'm not sure, but like we say, the realm of possibilities are infinite. Winston says a lot of work has to be done by the CCJ to instill confidence that the court is fair and balanced. Perception is everything, and presently there is a perception across the region that the CCJ is not trustworthy. What happened in the exposure in the last week does not help. I agree with you, Winston. And let me just say, I had not had a chance to say it, Winston. It was a delight to meet you on the street of Kingstown last week. I did promise to say it on another radio station, and I forgot. But here I am now, bigging you up and celebrating you. Thank you for being such a loyal listener to everything Vincent. Kenny Boucher says, Shoma, if the allegations that the president is fixing the panel, how could one have faith in the court? Agreed. How could one if he's fixing the panel? Dexter Rose says, this worries me, given our propensity to distrust our own institutions. Again, you're making a very important point. And yes, Sten Sergeant, thank you for reminding me just in time. The judge was Justice Brian Aline of Dominica. You know, so that's what I wanted to talk about in terms of where we are, in terms of Caribbean jurisprudence, in terms of what I perceive to be a really deep crisis. I think that Kenny Boucher says it's if the allegations that the president is fixing the panel, how could one have faith in the court? And then it's perception, as they say, perception is reality. If people are perceiving that the court is untrustworthy, if people are perceiving that the court can be fixed, that the court justice can be had, many people may have difficulties acceding or agreeing that we have a Caribbean court as the final court. We are just 25 years in. If we go to the Eastern Caribbean Supreme Court, I think we started in 67. So we are 33, 59 years in for the Eastern Caribbean Supreme Court, but 25 years in for the Caribbean Court of Justice. So we're still a very young court. And it may be said that we're still going through the teething pains of youthfulness. But this is truly, truly unfortunate information, news that's coming to hand. And I hope that the powers that be move aggressively to stem any fallout and to ensure that whatever do the investigations and let the pins fall wherever they might fall. Okay, so we take a break now and then we come back, and then I want to touch on a piece. I'll have a lead-in piece and then we'll talk about developments in the United States and the implications for St. Vincent and the Grenadines and the Caribbean. I am Jomo Thomas. This is Voices. We'll be right back.
WeFM 99.9 presents Voices, a talk show that's not just new, it's phenomenal. Voices, it's interactive and thought-provokingly different. Voices, hosted by Jomo Thomas. We'll analyze all the issues of concern to you, the people of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and the diaspora. Voices. We have a voice. We need your voice. Together, we are the people's voice. Voices.
These are some serious times. All I can see around us is violence and crime. Ooh, yeah. Ooh, yeah. They got so much things to say right now. They got so much things to say. They got so much things to say right now. They got so much things to say. Hey, but I'll never forget no way they crucified Jesus Christ. I'll never forget no way they sold Marcus Garvey for rice. Ooh, I'll never forget no way they turned their back on Paul Bogle. Hey, so don't you forget who you are and where you stand in the struggle. They got so very they say it's everything, they say so much today. They got so much things to say, so much things to say. 999 come to fight flesh and blood, but spiritual wickedness in high and low places. So while they fight you down, stand firm and give Jah thanks and praises. Cause I don't expect to be justified by the laws of men, by the laws of men.
Okay, I'm Jomo Thomas. This is Voices. We're back. So Kamala, if we could just before we post the piece, just to read a few more pieces from some of our listeners. Says Winston Young says it is sad and unfortunate, but I do believe eventually it will happen that the various states will come on board. Fillmore Scott says, what happened? Never heard these issues under Justice Adrian Sanders. And then Winston Jambon Young came back again to say it is only a matter of time when the Privy Council will say it's time to handle your own affairs. Well, I am hoping that they say that soon. Then we would have to do what we have to do on our own. So Kamal, yeah, if you can bring that piece in, please. Thank you.
Condoleezza Rice. We had Colin Powell, Condoleezza Rice, Barack Obama, Susan Rice, and then Kamala Harris, Linda Thomas Greenfield, which is seeing is a list of African Americans who actually only exist in those spaces because of the Black freedom struggle itself. That's the whole reason they're there, right? None of them would be there if not for the sacrifices of Martin Luther King, if not for the sacrifices of Coretta Scott King, if not for the sacrifices of Fannie Lou Hamer. What did they say we were supposed to do? Who did they imagine us being once we got into those roles? And I don't think they imagined us. In fact, I know because they said it, as people that would justify dropping bombs on people who are weaker than us. I can tell you what the struggle means to me.
Sure.
And the struggle means to me not just that we would get the boot off of our necks, but that we would destroy the boot, that this would not happen to other people. And I don't think I'm out on a limb on that. Like, I think that's always been the content of our struggle has always been that it's been bigger than us. That's been the fact of it. You know, it is not the case that the civil rights movement just benefited Black Americans themselves. It is not the case that Dr. Martin Luther King, you know, when he saw what was going on in Vietnam, said, well, I just need to shut up and just, you know, make sure my people were okay. It is not the case that Fannie Lou Hamer was only concerned about Mississippi. It's not the case that W.B. Du Bois was not concerned about the world. It is not the case that James Baldwin, you know, went over to Israel and was like, well, I can't talk about this because I'm only concerned about my people. What I'm trying to say is the best of us have always been concerned, you know, beyond ourselves. If you want to say that the endpoint of our dream, of our struggle, you know, is simply to, you know, get us in, you know, positions of power, to integrate us into the machine and to not, you know, change the machine, then don't talk about Fannie Lou Hamer. Don't talk about Dr. Martin Luther King. You know, because that wasn't what their lives were about.
Play it again.
We had Colin Powell, Condoleezza Rice, Barack Obama, Susan Rice, and then Kamala Harris, Linda Thomas Greenfield, which is seeing is a list of African Americans who actually only exist in those spaces because of the Black freedom struggle itself. That's the whole reason they're there, right? None of them would be there if not for the sacrifices of Martin Luther King, if not for the sacrifices of Coretta Scott King, if not for the sacrifices of Fannie Lou Hamer. What did they say we were supposed to do? Who did they imagine us being once we got into those roles? And I don't think they imagined us. In fact, I know because they said it, as people that would justify dropping bombs on people who are weaker than us. I can tell you what the struggle means to me.
Sure.
And the struggle means to me not just that we would get the boot off of our necks, but that we would destroy the boot, that this would not happen to other people. And I don't think I'm out on a limb on that. Like, I think that's always been the content of our struggle has always been that it's been bigger than us. That's been the fact of it. You know, it is not the case that the civil rights movement just benefited Black Americans themselves. It is not the case that Dr. Martin Luther King, you know, when he saw what was going on in Vietnam, said, well, I just need to shut up and just, you know, make sure my people were okay. It is not the case that Fannie Lou Hamer was only concerned about Mississippi. It's not the case that W.B. Du Bois was not concerned about the world. It is not the case that James Baldwin, you know, went over to Israel and was like, well, I can't talk about this because I'm only concerned about my people. What I'm trying to say is the best of us have always been concerned, you know, beyond ourselves. If you want to say that the endpoint of our dream, of our struggle, you know, is simply to, you know, get us in, you know, positions of power, to integrate us into the machine and to not, you know, change the machine, then don't talk about Fannie Lou Hamer. Don't talk about Dr. Martin Luther King. You know, because that wasn't what their lives were about.
Yeah. Now, for those people who don't know that brother, his name is Ta-Nehisi Coates. He's one of the most important public intellectuals in the United States, and I might say around the world. I first came to know Ta-Nehisi Coates years ago when I lived in the United States. He used to write in the Village Voice. And even then I thought, you know, there was a lot of rumbling in his writing. He used to write some very, very long pieces in the Village Voice, and I never had the discipline to stay with it. And then in 2014, he got a job with the Atlantic magazine, and he wrote a piece called The Case for Reparations. I encourage all of the listeners, anyone hearing this, to go and Google Ta-Nehisi Coates' The Case for Reparations and read it, because he really took a peripheral issue, an issue that had been on the back burners, and brought it front and center. It was such an important piece that by 2016, 15 of the 19 persons who were contending for the Democratic nomination mentioned some form or fashion of reparations as something that they would want to do. And then in 2015, he wrote the broke-out piece, Between the World and Me, a letter to his son, he said. And he laid out a number of very important things, talking about the ways in which Black people are seen and perceived in the United States and other parts of the world. And then in 2017, he wrote, we were 8 years in power, which is a brilliant piece. A lot of people thought that it was we were 8 years in power was reflecting the Obama years. And it is true, he talked about the Obama years in there. But what he was really mirroring, and what that term, we were 8 years in power, came from, was the 8 years between 1865, when you had the Emancipation Proclamation by Lincoln, 1864, 1865, and the period where you had the Jacksonian counter-revolution, once President Andrew Jackson emerged as the President of the United States. A brilliant, brilliant, brilliant work, for which he got some flack in it, because I remember Cornel West, Dr. Cornel West, that brilliant American philosopher, civil rights writer, intellectual, did not like his characterization of Obama as the modern day Martin Luther King. I don't think he would say that now if he used to reflect on that today. So in 2017, he wrote the piece, we were 8 years in power. And if you thought Between the World and Me were problematic, Between the World and Me and we were in 8 years, in 2024, he wrote the piece, The Message. And in the message, there were like 3 essays in the message. One talked about him going to Senegal, which was his first visit to Africa. The second essay talked about him going down to the South, where some school boards were attempting to ban books, including his Between the World and Me. And then the most explosive of the essays had to do with his visit to Israel. And in that essay, he got a lot of flack. But I am so proud of him because he says when he wrote it, as a public intellectual, he did not care what the blowback would be. He knew it was coming, but he did not care. He thought intellectual honesty allowed him to say, demanded that he say that Israel was an apartheid state that was doing huge injustice to the Palestinian people, that he wanted to bring that to the world. And again, by doing that, he took an issue that again had been on the periphery, the whole question of the rights of Palestinian people, and brought it front and center. So today, if you notice, when people are Israel today is less popular, has less support in the United States and many places across the world than Palestine. In the United States, where it was just Israel was, you say Israel, and everybody supported it. In fact, the political class in the United States are still that way, as we are seeing. In fact, there was a bill a few months ago to merge the United States and the Israeli army. And over the years, even in the face of the genocide, the Israeli genocide against the Palestinian people, the American governments, the American parliament passed into law acts that give billions and billions of dollars to Israel. But you know, because of Ta-Nehisi Coates' book, the truth that Israel had a right to exist, Israel has a right to defend itself, is no longer accepted as oracles of faith. As Ta-Nehisi Coates said in an article, states don't have the right to exist. People do. And he was contrasting that with this notion that, yeah, Israel has a right to exist, as if Israel should exist at the expense of every single person in Palestine. So now you may look at certain discussions and you may hear different individuals saying Israel does not have a right to exist. So on two fundamental issues in the last 15 years, 10 years, 12 years, 2014, the case for reparations that brought that mainstream, at least in the United States, which came a year after the CARICOM, Caribbean Community Leaders, decided that they're going to make reparations a clarion call and push for it. So Ta-Nehisi brought the American case into that whole broad struggle for reparatory justice a year after CARICOM did in 2013. So in 2014, he did that. And again, 10 years after, he did the message, in which he took the issue of Palestine from these people who you can slap around and beat up and do whatever you want, and give them a sense of respectability, a sense of honor, and to put their struggle in a proper context. The piece that you are seeing, the excerpt from that piece, has to do with another piece which Ta-Nehisi did recently in what's the magazine again? Can't remember the magazine now, but I'm sure I'll remember before somebody who's astute, because we have some very astute people on this platform, will tell us he wrote this piece in which he questioned the National Democratic Conference, Congress, or whatever they're called, that leading body that takes care of Democratic Party affairs. And he talked in the piece about the weaknesses of the Kamala Harris coronation, in which he made the point that in the heart of the genocide against the Palestinian people in Gaza, in the West Bank, in Palestine, the Kamala Harris leadership could not bring themselves to allow a Palestinian American or an Arab to speak at the her coronation. And many people believe that that alienated her from a broad cross section, particularly young people, and which may have cost her the presidential election. But Ta-Nehisi Coates was making the point, as you saw in this piece, that you can't invoke the name of Fannie Lou Hamer. And people who don't know must remember and understand Fannie Lou Hamer. Because when Fannie Lou Hamer came up from Mississippi, her argument was at that convention, and she won the ire of Lyndon Johnson. She said, in Mississippi and across the Black South, we are sick and tired of being sick and tired. And it was through this column that Ta-Nehisi Coates wrote that I realized that Coretta Scott King had taken up the issue of opposition to the Vietnam War before Martin Luther King. But Martin Luther King lost his life for it because clearly his wife, Coretta Scott King, didn't have the cachet as Martin Luther King. So when Martin Luther King went to the Riverside Church, I think it was on April, no, it was a few days before his assassination. When he went to the Riverside Church and says in that famous speech, why I oppose the war in Vietnam, and declared America to be the biggest purveyor of violence in the world, that's when the American system decided they're going to cut him down. But Vanity Fair, the name of the magazine. So if you all could go and look for it, and look for the Ta-Nehisi Coates, I'm sure there's a paywall, but some of you are ingenious. I'm sure you would be able to break past the paywall and read that piece by Ta-Nehisi Coates. But in there, he's talking about you can't invoke the name of Martin Luther King and Coretta Scott King and Fannie Lou Hamer and all of the others, and then still claim that you're fighting for anything. He said, as he said in this piece, all of the freedom fighters, the freedom struggle was not solely about taking the boots off our necks. What did he say the assignment was? The assignment was to destroy the boots. You know, all of the great ones talked about, we can go as far back as Marx, but I'm sure others before Marx talked about no one would be free. No one would be truly free unless all of us are free. So in the Vanity Fair piece, Ta-Nehisi Coates was throwing down the gauntlet because he says I saw him in a prior interview where he said, what are the Democrats going to do in 2028 to tell us that this is the most consequential election in our lives? Because it cannot be that they're going to tell us that this is the most consequential election, because otherwise that way, if you continue with that way is thin. And the folly of the position of people like Kamala Harris and the Democratic establishment is reflected in what has happened recently in Michigan. Because remember, Kamala Harris ended up losing Michigan, which has a high Muslim Arab community, precisely because of her support for the genocide in Palestine. But something remarkable happened over the last week in Michigan, in that Dr. Al-Said, a Rhodes Scholar, by all definitions, a decent, brilliant, hardworking man, Dr. Al-Said, won the Democratic nomination for the Senate. And he won it even though the Jewish, well, not a Jewish, the Zionist lobby spent over $30 million to stop him. He won it narrowly, but he won it. We saw it before with Mamdani in New York, where the Zionists, after Cuomo was trounced in the primaries, the Zionists sponsored Cuomo to run independent against Mamdani. But what people didn't know, or what people may not have known, which was brought out in the campaign, is that Cuomo was the attorney for Netanyahu in New York, one of the New York attorneys for Netanyahu. He was carrying a brief for the Zionists. And Mamdani still whipped him, convincing. So it is clear that, you know, it is said sometimes the writer, the journalist, Chris Hedges, talks about sublime madness. And he said sublime madness is this view, this belief that you know that you're going to engage in activity in which you may not win. He says sometimes not only you may not win, you know you would lose, but you do it anyway as a matter of principle. Sublime madness. And the hope is that more of us would adopt the principle of sublime madness, because we may miscalculate and think we can't win. But if we hold true to form, as Dr. Al-Said did in Michigan, and emerge as a Democratic Party candidate for the Senate, or we do as Mamdani did, and some of those other Democratic Socialists did across America, even in the face of a massive, aggressive financial push by the Zionist lobby, they still emerge victorious, which is showing that the circle is closing on a lot of things. And if we fight and keep on fighting, remembering what, in Ta-Nehisi words, the Black freedom struggles and what they were about, we would do much better. And what does all of this have to do with us in the region? For one thing, it means we should be true to principle. For one thing, it means that we should not lose our humanitarian spirit. For one thing, it means that we must stand firm. As Michael Manley used to say, we must stand on our feet and not our knees. Because, you know, if you're not true to principle, in the eyes of those who expect good things of you, you would be disrespected. You would be despised. You would be not be taken seriously. But in the eyes of those persons whose bidding you carry out as a traitor, for example, you have no honor. They would always think that you can be had. They would always think that you can be had. And I think that for us in the region, we have to go back to first principles and go back to the early years with the emergence of CARICOM, and go back to the teachings of Eric Williams and some of the other founding fathers, where Eric Williams told us, look, when the British were leaving, what they did was to suck the Caribbean like an orange. And on departure, the only thing they were concerned about was that they don't slip and fall on the peel which they threw on the ground. You know, and then you make things so difficult for these islands. And I think it was Dr. Robinson in one of his columns 2 weeks ago talked about you walked away, or people didn't have land, we didn't have money, we didn't have anything. You paid the enslavers 20 million pounds. And as a result of that, these countries end up being some of the most indebted countries in the world because we have nothing. But this generation that is coming, we have to teach this generation not only that they have to work hard, but they have to work smart, that they have to use their mind, because they have, I am absolutely convinced the younger generation is much smarter than we are and will make really, really good decisions. But what we have to do is to teach and guide and be examples. So as we move forward and as we look at what's happening around the world, we look at what is happening in Cuba, honorable country that is being choked. And many of us are too concerned with a visa that we watch our brothers and sisters die and we don't say anything. Cheryl, did she really? Cheryl said that Kamala Harris lost because she was a female. People would rather vote for a man, Biden or Trump, than vote for Hillary or Kamala. Look at the quality of the candidates that those women lost to. Right? There's something to be said for that argument. There's something to be said for that argument. But is that the sole reason why they lose? Or is that the main reason why they lose? And the way to test that is to ask, why did Bernie Sanders lose? Was it because he was the most progressive of all of them? I think the answer is no. I think what happened is that they ganged up. The Democratic establishment ganged up on him. The Democratic establishment ganged up on him in 2016, and they ganged up on him in 2020. because they didn't want somebody with Bernie's politics to go up against the Republicans, because they were thinking that it's going to be a lost case. In much the same way that what's his name? The guy who's married to Mary Magdalene, not Mary Magdalene. She's an American conservative consultant, a Republican consultant. He was a key figure in the Bill Clinton emergence. He's the one who coined the term that Bill Clinton used. It's the economy stupid. Somebody got to help me. Somebody got to remember what his name was. But he, as a Democratic powerhouse, said he can't support the Mamdani because Mamdani's principles and politics are not in line with his politics. We're not talking about the people's politics, you know. They're not in line with his politics. Nobody can remember his name? James Carville. James Carville is his name. James Carville, thank you. Thank you. I know we have some people in here who would help us. James Carville. Yeah. So Cheryl, I am not so sure that they lost simply. I mean, you know that the establishment is putting up some really, really bad guys. And because they have a lot of money and because they control the mass media, some of them are winning. We only have to look, for example, at Trump and Biden in the US. We look at Michael Johnson. Not Michael Johnson, Boris Johnson in the UK. Narendra Modi in India. The guy Milieu in Argentina, the one who's going up now against Lula, the son of the former president, Bolsonaro, son of Juan Bolsonaro. Very mediocre people who are going up and talking about these things. You know, it's just amazing. So I think that there's a machine that is helping mediocre people to emerge, but they are not the best. Even if we look at Hillary or we look at Kamala Harris, there's some baggage that they have. And don't forget, Hillary Clinton says that, you know, she went to Libya. We came, we saw, we killed. Remember that statement? In the destruction of Africa's second most developed country, Libya. Where in Libya today, people like me would probably put on a slave back and to be sold as a slave. So she's a very reactionary woman. She and Obama were instrumental in overthrowing Mohamed Morsi, the president of Egypt, the elected president, popularly elected president of Egypt, she and Obama. She and Obama were instrumental in overthrowing President Manuel Zelaya in Honduras in 2009. So this notion, these people are not virtuous in any way. But sometimes we get taken up by them and we do a lot of things and we say a lot of things. But I really want us to connect the dots, because I think that a lot of people don't connect the dots. So Martin Luther King 58 years ago would say that America is the most terroristic country in the world. And that doesn't get played on the mass media, so people forget that Martin Luther King said that. And if Jomo Thomas says it on August 10, 2026, people wonder, well, What's wrong with him? Or if, as we saw in that piece by Ta-Nehisi Coates, you say, look, none of the black freedom people in the freedom struggles, Fannie Lou Hamer, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, W.E.B. Du Bois, none of them would think that we must make this part of our world good and allow some of the most horrific acts of violence to take place against the weak in another part of the world. This is why Martin Luther King spoke out against the war in Vietnam. This is why Chris Hedges lost his job as the New York Times bureau chief in the Middle East, because he spoke out against the American aggression in Iraq. So you have to stand. You have a caller? Yeah,
we have a caller. Let's try and get this caller in.
Caller, good evening. It's time for your voice.
All right, just 1 second. It's responding kind of slow. All right, we have caller.
Caller, good evening.
Is that open forum again?
Jeez.
Good evening. Just make your comment, sir. Make your comment, ask a question.
I want to revisit the thing with the bag when they take the bag off in St. Lucia. And I agree with them.
What?
When they take off the bag to accommodate a passenger in St. Lucia.
No. We're not talking about that tonight. We're not talking about that tonight. We're talking about something. No, I didn't say it was open forum. We had a particular facts. You gotta come in, you gotta listen to the program and try to get a tenor for what we're talking about. We're not talking about no bags off no plane tonight.
No, you ain't talking about, but if it's an open forum, it's anything.
Come on. We're not talking about bags on a plane tonight.
Okay, got you.
Look, I mean, you can't come in midway. We're talking, I introduced this section by doing a snippet from Ta-Nehisi Coates. So speaking of fundamental questions, you want to come back with some bag coming off of a plane and why the bag came off. That can't be important in the context of what we're talking about. Don't do that to yourself, please. So yeah, this record, that's just my take on Hillary. And Jambon says she was perceived to be, Kamala Harris was perceived to be too left. I'm not sure if he's talking about Kamala Harris or if he's talking about Hillary Clinton, but neither of them were left. I mean, I'm sure that there might have been some male chauvinism and everything else, and people looking down on women and thinking, but I don't think that they're left. If people remember, Kamala Harris was the one who went after poor parents in California when she was the Attorney General because some of their children were truant. She argued that if the children didn't go to school or they didn't do this or the other, or they engage in some kind of illegal activity, the parents should be sent to jail. So I'm not sure how left that is. That is just reactionary if you ask me. But you see the spectrum, this thing that we call left progressive spectrum is so wide now that anybody, any wishy-washy person comes in as being part of the left or being progressive. And I think that we have to guard against that. Can't this whole thing about our people's forward movement or people's liberation, it cannot be wash your foot and come. You have to have some principles, you have to have some understanding, you have to have then you have to do some heavy lifting We got to do some heavy lifting, because only with heavy lifting that we are going to help to really move our people along. And that is why I talked about, again, that quote, where Ta-Nehisi Coates says, where he says that this whole concept of intellectualism, the biggest weakness about it, let me pull up the exact quote, because I don't want to misquote him. But I think it's, we talked about, I mentioned before, but I just want to go back and mention it again. He says, there is no quality in intellectual life that's more overrated than intellect itself. No quality in intellectual life that is more overrated than intellect itself. So people may say, oh yeah, they went to good schools, yeah, they had good careers as lawyers and this and that and that. But, you know, it's like in St. Vincent, you hear somebody say, anybody that goes to university and comes back, he says, so when are you going to run for politics? The person may not have any interest in politics, the person may not have a clue about anything. The person may not be able to tell you when last they read a book since they come back from university. I remember speaking to a man who celebrated the fact that 7 years after leaving university, he has not read a book. He's not opened the book. And he was proud of it. But people may say, he went to university, so he should get into national life. But I think that we have to have a way of thinking through what we are doing, because it's not about us. It is easy for some of us to become comfortable. We go to school, we get a good job, we make some money, and we are comfortable. We don't make sacrifices for others. But I think it was, what's the name again? The woman writer. The American woman's writer there. My remote is rotting. My memory is going. What she talks about, you know, we have to put each other up. You do what you can do, and then you go back. It's in the tradition. Is in the tradition of Sojourner Truth. You know, Sojourner Truth didn't just get to freedom and say, "Okay, I am free." She did good work in the underground railroad, and she went back and brought others to freedom. And not only did she bring others to freedom, she says, if only more of our people knew that they were out and free, more of them would have marched to freedom. But many of them didn't think they were unfree. So, Michael, you can't bother with some people, you know. We just have to keep on doing what we are doing. This is why, if you notice, people would come and they would say all kind of things, and they would do all kind of things, and I don't bother. If you notice, I write a column, I read everything that people say, but I don't respond to most of what people say. Because you have to do your work confident of the work that you're doing. And you can't spend your energy expending it on negative things. A man comes on, a woman comes on and says that Jomo Thomas is a thief in law, for example. And I know that I've been practicing for 30 years and I never stole anything from anyone. I'm not going to respond to that. You know? Who did I say? I thought, Andrew, I thought I said What did I say? Sojourner Truth? Yeah, I think you're right. Harriet Tubman is the person that I wanted to say. I said Sojourner Truth. Yeah, thank you. You see, we have some people on here. You see, these are the kind of people who want to come. You know, Jomo comes on here and he talks foolishness, and somebody says, that's not the person. We're talking about Harriet Tubman, and you know, so we have a nice little callaloo, as we say, and at the end, when we get to 10 o'clock, we can say all of us contributed in making an evening of discussion and education and enlightenment. You know, that's what we want. At least that's what I want. That's what I've been trying to do since 2005. When I started this Voices radio program. Not for me. Because I just thought that there's some things that need to be said. This is why I try to bring on a lot of people. And this is why the program is called Voices. To bring voices on. People who you don't normally hear. You get a chance to hear them and to share ideas and opinions with them, and to argue with them. But I think part of the problem is that we don't have a culture of argument. We perceive the notion of argument as this wildness that we have on the street corners, in the rum shops, in the bars, in the clubs. But fundamentally, argument is about reasoning and logic and making a point and sticking with a point and battling with someone. It's not about getting angry or cursing or any of that. But I think we have corrupted what argument, when we say argument, what we mean. So a lot of time when we say argument, we're not talking about logic. We're talking about emotions. We want to bring heat. We want to run from light. So, but I am here. I'm going to try my best. I intend to do this for a little while longer. I intend to do it until I'm old. Although I'm pretty old now. But I know in my head I have a cutoff point. You know, it's like when I used to play cricket and I knew it's time for me to stop. So when I meet my friends now, I say, no, I retired. In much the same way I've come to that time, and this is why I pay so much attention to young people. I want young people to come on. You know, and this is why some time ago I celebrated some of our young writers. When I saw Dr. Justin Robinson start writing in the Searchlight, brilliant pieces. If you haven't read him, you must read him. I am excited about that. You see people like Guevara Leacock writing A View from the Outside. Brilliant. I am excited about that. And Kenrick Washi, Marlon Butte, writing, going back, exercising their minds. You know, I am sorry I wasn't reading Dr. Justin Roberts for the past 20 years. I mean, the man has a way in which he puts words together. It just flies off the page. So that's what I want to celebrate. That's what I want to see us celebrate. Because you can be sure when these brothers, and if we get more sisters writing, I remember Holly Bino used to write some excellent pieces, you know. Sister Anicia Baptiste does some excellent commentary on her podcast. That's what we want. We don't have to, and the thing is, we don't have to agree with everybody. We don't have to agree with what people are saying, but we want to give word to what they're saying because they took their time to think it through. Somebody sit down and write 800 words, 1,000 words. Before you jump to criticize that, ask yourself if you could do it every week. Or ask yourself if you were to start doing it, how long you can keep up with it. All right, I'll try. You know, I try to invite a lot of people, you know. Someone is asking me to try and see if we can have Shafia London on. That's a good idea. I'll try my best. But a lot of times you ask, I mean, I would like, now that the ULP is out, I would like to see some of their people start coming on. But they have consistently refused to come on. But I'll try to see if Shafia can come. She's a good voice. She's an accomplished woman. So we'll try to have her. That's all we want to do. And I hope, you know, some of you will pick up some things here and you carry it to your children. You carry it to those young people that you interact with. You carry it to them and say, look, you go to a bookstore. Many of you, like in the United States, you go and instead of buying some toy for some child, you buy a book. Encourage them to read. Because one of the things that we know, that any child who's consistently reading is going to do good in school. I don't know a child who has read from, let's say, 8 until 12, consistently, book after book after book, and do not do well in school. But we have the TikTok culture now, where you're chopping up words and, if I tell you, like I never use words, like I have never used the word, you know how people write the word long? I've never used that. Because I think it's a destruction of language. And I think that part and parcel of us developing is we have to read, we have to pay attention to what good people are saying. And even people who may not support what you want to hear, you want to read it and know about it because you have to be able to combat it. So I don't just read things by people who I love. Like there's a conservative columnist in the Washington Post called George Bell. I don't agree with his conclusions, but he can write. And I like to read what he writes. So I think that's the tradition we have to develop, you know, because I go back to First Bases 50 years ago when I first heard Ralph Gonzalez speak at Peace Memorial Hall. Spoke. And I remember I was so impressed with the presentation. I went up to Renard Rose. I said, well, how did he do that? And I remember Renard Rose saying to me, Reverend Jomo, if you want to be able to speak like that, you have to read. Never stop reading since then. But I don't want to go on illegally. It's a minute after 10. I want to thank you all so much for coming on. I want to thank you all so much for being here. I want to thank my brother Fax for calling. I hope you would bring more facts, continue to bring facts with us. All of you who came in and contribute, I want to thank you. There's so many other things that you could have done, but guess what? You stayed here for the last 2 hours. Remember, read, pay close attention, because what you don't know can kill you. Until next week, this is Jomo Thomas saying good night from Voices.
We FM 99.9 presents Voices, a talk show that's not